Do you believe your decisions are truly conscious? Or could there be something hidden inside you, something pulling the strings without you realizing it? Carl Jung, one of the greatest scholars of the human mind, revealed an uncomfortable truth. What you desire the most is exactly what you repress the most. And the more you try to deny these impulses, the more they silently shape your life. You think you are in control, but often it is your unconscious mind making decisions for you. You choose a relationship, a career, a lifestyle, believing you are following logic, but deep down, it is repressed desires that dictate your steps. You create masks to appear strong, balanced, and rational, while ignoring the forces that stir in the underground of your psyche. Today, you will understand how these hidden desires shape your actions and sabotage your dreams. And more importantly, you will discover how recognizing these invisible impulses can completely change the way you live. You are about to see the reality behind the choices you believe are yours, and from this moment on, nothing you do will be seen the same way again. Carl Jung believed that within each of us, there is a hidden part, an invisible force formed from everything we reject, deny, and try to forget. This part, according to Jung, is called the shadow. The shadow is not just a collection of mistakes or flaws you try to hide from others. It's made of all the desires, impulses, and truths you once considered too unacceptable to show to the world. Everything you learned to hate about yourself. Everything society pointed to as wrong. Everything you felt ashamed to be. But instead of disappearing, these banished parts hide within you. They remain alive, acting silently, waiting for the right moment to emerge. Every time you ignore your deepest feelings, you feed the shadow. Every time you pretend not to feel anger, fear, envy, or desire, you give more power to the hidden side of your mind. And the shadow, like a forgotten entity, begins to grow. It seeps into your thoughts, influences your decisions, sabotages your relationships, and creates patterns you cannot explain. You think you're choosing consciously, but what's really in control is what you refuse to face. The anger that explodes without reason, the anxiety that appears out of nowhere, the impulse to destroy something you've built. These are signs that the shadow is taking over, and the more you deny its existence, the more powerful it becomes. The shadow is like a part of your soul imprisoned, and an imprisoned soul never stays silent for long. It whispers in your dreams, shows up in your repeated mistakes, and appears at moments you least expect. And the less you recognize the shadow, the more it will lead your life down paths you would never have consciously chosen. But what happens when the shadow reaches the breaking point? What happens when what you've tried to hide for years demands to be seen? When this hidden force begins to drive your emotions, your choices, and even your destiny? You're about to discover how what you hide the most becomes exactly what governs your thoughts and shapes your reality. And the most frightening part is that, without realizing it, you may be walking toward becoming the very embodiment of what you always swore to avoid. The journey to face the shadow is not easy, but ignoring it may cost you something you don't even realize you're already losing. Carl Jung was not alone in his conclusions. Throughout the centuries, different schools of thought have reached similar insights about the human mind and its deepest mysteries. Modern psychology confirms what Jung already intuited. The repression of natural impulses does not simply disappear over time. It transforms into hidden symptoms, into inexplicable anguish, into self-destructive behaviors that seem to arise out of nowhere. Sigmund Freud, the father of psychoanalysis, also recognized that what is repressed is not forgotten, but returns in distorted and painful forms. The anxiety that paralyzes, the compulsion that destroys, the sadness that consumes are often just masks of what was buried alive in the unconscious. But the understanding of this phenomenon goes far beyond modern psychology. Ancient civilizations already knew that what is denied within man turns against him. Alchemy, often superficially seen as a quest to transform lead into gold, was in fact a metaphor for the process of inner transformation. Jung delved deeply into alchemical studies and realized something few understood. The symbols, the rituals, the alchemical metaphors all represented the journey of integrating the human psyche. The alchemist, in seeking the philosopher's stone, was not trying to manipulate matter, but rather to achieve the integration of his own shadow, to reconcile the opposites within himself, to reach a state of psychological wholeness. This idea revolutionized the way Jung interpreted not only ancient symbols, but also dreams, visions, and even the slips of language that occur in everyday life. Every disturbing dream, every seemingly insignificant mistake, every unexpected impulse is an attempt by the unconscious to bring forth what was rejected. And what few know is that Jung observed that the most recurring symbols in human dreams have universal roots. They appear in cultures that never had contact with one another, suggesting that there is a collective unconscious shared among all of us. These ancestral symbols speak directly to the most primitive and profound part of our minds, bringing messages that we consciously ignore, but that continue to influence us silently. When you dream of labyrinths, of old houses, of wild animals, your unconscious is trying to communicate something your rational mind refuses to accept. The ancient alchemists understood this intuitively. That is why they represented personal transformation through images of death and rebirth, fire and dissolution, conflict and union. They knew that to find the true essence, it was necessary to face the inner chaos, not deny it. Jung brought this knowledge into modern psychology and showed that the same path is necessary for those who wish to break free from destructive patterns. Ignoring the hidden impulses of the soul not only strengthens the shadow, but also imprisons consciousness in endless cycles of repetition and suffering. That is why so many fail to change their behaviors, even with strong willpower, because real change does not happen through conscious force alone. It requires the participation of the unconscious. And for this to happen, it is necessary to decipher the symbols that appear in everyday life, in dreams, in sudden emotions. Every small lapse, every uncomfortable feeling, every internal conflict carries precious information the unconscious is trying to send. Few have the courage to listen to these messages. Few are willing to face the inner images that reveal what truly happens in the darkness of the soul. But those who dare to look within and translate the hidden symbols find something few ever discover: the key to a truly free mind. The key to a life where the darkest impulses no longer act as saboteurs, but become allies in the process of inner growth. The path is not simple, but it is the only one that leads to true transformation. Maybe now you're wondering how to identify the signs your unconscious sends every day. Maybe you think it takes a trained mind or years of study to perceive what is hidden behind the symbols and impulses that arise without warning. But the truth is that the messages from the unconscious are everywhere. They appear in subtle ways, camouflaged in your routine, in small gestures, in the words you choose without thinking. They emerge in the dreams you forget upon waking, in the thoughts you try to push away, in the uncomfortable sensations that arise for no apparent reason. And although these messages are everywhere, few have the ability to recognize them, because the unconscious is clever. It uses the language of symbols, metaphors, and unexpected associations. It speaks through images and emotions, not through rational logic. That is why what seems like a meaningless nightmare or a bizarre coincidence is often a cry from the unconscious trying to pierce the veil of consciousness. And understanding this symbolic language is the first step to breaking the cycle of self-sabotage that imprisons so many. But there's something even more disturbing. Jung discovered that repressed contents do not only manifest individually, they also organize into collective patterns, patterns that shape entire cultures, patterns that span generations. These hidden patterns do not affect only your personal life. They build the society you live in. They define what you consider right or wrong, beautiful or ugly, acceptable or unacceptable. They program your desires, your choices, your beliefs, without you even realizing it. And the most alarming part is that if you do not learn to recognize these patterns, you will continue to be a puppet of forces you are not even aware exist. You will keep fighting symptoms without ever healing the real cause. You will keep repeating the same mistakes, believing you're evolving, while in truth, you're only circling inside an invisible labyrinth. The collective unconscious dictates trends, behaviors, ideologies, social crises, mass movements. And what begins as personal repression transforms into a collective movement of alienation and conflict. The irrational rage that explodes in crowds, the fear that paralyzes entire societies, the frantic pursuit of status symbols that never satisfy. All of this is a reflection of the collective shadow that no one wants to face. But there's an even more unsettling detail. Jung realized that within the shadow, there are not only repressed desires, there are also forgotten potentials, buried talents, creative forces that were deemed dangerous and thus denied. The same place where your darkest fears dwell also holds the power that could transform your life in ways you never thought possible. The key lies in knowing how to cross the unknown territory of the unconscious without being consumed by it. Most people fail in this mission. Most get lost in their own internal labyrinths and end up becoming slaves to their own demons. But for those who dare to cross this territory, something extraordinary awaits on the other side. And in the next step, you will begin to understand how to decipher the hidden signs your unconscious sends. Signs that can reveal not only your deepest fears, but also the path to unleashing the strength you unknowingly hide within yourself. When you begin to recognize the signs of the unconscious, something profound starts to change within you. The sensations that once seemed uncontrollable begin to make sense. The anxiety that used to arise from nowhere reveals its hidden origin. The anger you tried to suppress transforms into creative strength. The compulsions that once commanded your choices lose their power. And for the first time, you no longer feel like a victim of your own impulses. You realize there has always been an internal dialogue happening, but until now, you refused to listen. By recognizing the symbolic messages that arise from dreams, slips, and repressed feelings, you reconnect with parts of yourself that were exiled long ago. You begin to integrate instead of fight, accept instead of deny, transform instead of destroy. And it is at this moment that true psychological power begins to emerge, because what once seemed to weaken you now becomes a source of wisdom and inner strength. The shadow you once feared ceases to be an invisible enemy and becomes an ally in the process of building a new identity. You become more whole, more lucid, more free. And the freedom that arises is not the illusory freedom of blindly following every impulse. It is the conscious freedom of choosing your paths based on a true understanding of who you are inside. This transformation does not happen overnight. Just as the alchemist spent years purifying his internal substances, the journey of psychological integration demands patience, courage, and constant presence. But the benefits are so profound that few can even describe them in words. Imagine living without the constant burden of repressed emotions sabotaging your decisions. Imagine looking at your own fears without being dominated by them. Imagine transforming your greatest vulnerabilities into your greatest sources of creativity and purpose. This is the path Jung described, a path few have the courage to walk. And if you remember the story we started together, the story of the shadow growing silently within each of us, maybe now you realize that ignoring it was never a safe option. What you repress today will become the invisible chain that binds your choices tomorrow. What you pretend not to feel will become the monster that haunts your steps in the future. The integration of the shadow is not just a distant theory or a philosophical ideal. It is an urgent necessity for anyone who wants to live with authenticity and true psychological power. When you integrate the shadow, you access an emotional intelligence that goes beyond social masks. You develop a resilience that does not depend on the approval of others. You build an internal center so strong that the storms of life can no longer tear you down. And this strength begins to change everything around you. Your relationships stop being battlegrounds and become places of mutual growth. Your career choices begin to reflect your true talents and passions. Your physical health improves because the body no longer carries the weight of constant emotional repression. Your mind becomes clear like a polished mirror, able to reflect reality without distortions caused by fear or denial. This process of transformation is what the ancients symbolized with the image of alchemical gold. The inner gold is not material wealth. It is awakened consciousness, It is a mind that has unified its opposites. It is a spirit that has stopped warring against itself and has begun to use its inner forces harmoniously. But this gold can only be found by those who cross the dark territory of their own soul. Those who have the courage to descend into the underworld of themselves and face what they find there. Jung knew this journey was risky. He knew many would get lost along the way. But he also knew that those who succeeded in completing the crossing would become truly free. Not free from human emotions, but free from illusion, free from self-sabotage, free from the invisible chains that bind so many to lives that do not reflect who they truly are. And now that you understand the hidden power that resides within your shadow, you must know there is an ancient practice, forgotten by most, capable of accelerating this inner integration. A practice that few dare to apply, but that opens doors to dimensions of the mind you never imagined you could access. But why do so few manage to complete this journey? Why do so many, even with access to knowledge, still remain prisoners of their own unconscious impulses? The answer lies in something Jung understood in his deepest studies. The unconscious does not merely send discrete signals, it also creates subtle traps to protect its secrets. These traps take the form of constant distractions, deceitful rationalizations, uncontrollable emotions that arise at the exact moment you begin to approach the hidden truth. The unconscious fights to keep its territory closed because it knows that consciousness brings irreversible changes. And to the psyche, changes are always seen as threats before they are perceived as liberation. This is why many give up before they even start. Others believe they have achieved integration when, in truth, they have only replaced one illusion with another. But those who recognize these traps and move forward, they discover something that cannot be taught in books or transmitted through words. They discover a new dimension of the mind, a silent strength that is born from the meeting of light and shadow, a consciousness that becomes capable of looking at any aspect of life without fear, without rejection, without denial. But to get there, it is necessary to pass through what Jung called the dark night of the soul, a period when everything you thought you were falls apart, a moment when the masks fall and forgotten truths emerge. And it is in this abyss that true transformation happens. But how can you recognize that you have entered the dark night of the soul? How can you know if you are merely going through a crisis, or if you are truly facing the opportunity to be reborn from within? In our next encounter, we will explore the secret signs of this passage and reveal what few masters have dared to teach about true psychological rebirth.